And I would say I pretty early on realized that the thing that people call weird, it's just gross insecurity. Like there is rampant, like identity crisis on mass scale in the city. And it comes out in some like really cool ways. So people will like just over-identify with certain, things, hobbies, identities, all that kind of thing.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, so Simon Bardoni, welcome to the Jesus in the Upper Left podcast. It's good to have you.
It's good to be here. So that's what you call it, Jesus in the Upper Left.
Yes.
I didn't actually realize I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that this is that.
Yeah. We were trying to go with like the genre of like funky puns, like at all the cannabis shops. You know how they think of really creative, like playful puns. Yeah. Or like bridge something, river something, like like cool church names and stuff where you got to like somehow get into the Stumptown vibe.
Yeah.
So Upper Left,
which means what?
Well, just like step back, geography, right?
So it's not a political category. That's what I was thinking. Like, is this like a super liberal podcast?
Welcome
like
to the ultra progressive.
Yeah.
But elevated, classy.
Yeah.
It's the upper. Yeah. We're not the lower left.
The upper crust of the left.
Yeah. Not far right. It's upper left. That's what I thought I was getting myself into.
And you still came.
Yeah. I was gonna
be a very
set you guys straight. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're pretty close to the election. We're gonna talk about no, we're not actually.
Okay.
And then
the
I'm
Pacific Northwest. That makes sense.
Here with Andre.
Hello.
On the Pacific Upper Left podcast. That didn't quite work, but so good to see you. Thank you again for joining and being a guest co-host.
My pleasure. Happy to be here in the Upper Left.
Yes. Okay. So Simon, you're a church planner. How many years in are you?
Over about 7.5 years.
Does that feel like a lifetime?
Yeah. A lot has happened in the last. So it'll be technically we planted in January of 2017. We arrived in Portland around September of 2016. So however you want to look at it, we're coming up on 8 years, really close to 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and it does. It feels like it's been a long time, but also like not.
Yeah.
Like it's all flown by. It's all a blur.
Yeah. So start us out with the journey. Like what's your story of God calling you into ministry, calling you to Portland, and then a little bit of maybe just major milestones along those 7 years?
Okay. So I would start by saying that Portland was never like the plan. It wasn't like, this is where we want to be. This is the city. This is somehow we've got to figure out how to get to Portland and plant a church. Portland was something we just sort of like stumbled into. I would say we started in London, England. So I was telling you earlier, like I was born and raised in California, but it's been very, very long since I've lived there. I moved to the UK in 2006 to work for a local church there as a pastor, a missionary, and ended up meeting my wife there. She's South African, a lot of South Africans in London. We got married pretty quick and then got married and had all three of our kids while we were living in London. Had a fantastic experience, just great church, got to learn a lot. In terms of just ministry and sharing the gospel cross-culturally, and got to, just do a lot of cool things. It was quite an adventure. Around 2014, 2015, things began to shift. There were some changes, some circumstances, ministry things, and it prompted us to begin praying about like, okay, what next? Is this a season of change? At that point in our lives and our ministry, it kind of felt like I think the next thing might be to plant a church. That just sounds really fun. Like that just seems like, we might be good at that. So we started praying about that, and we sort of submitted that to our pastors and some of the leaders in the church where we were at the moment at that time, and things started to align. everyone seemed to be in agreement. We were all praying, and pretty quickly, the next big question became just where. And so we thought for sure we'd end up like someplace in the UK, maybe Europe, for sure not back in the States or South Africa for that matter. Not that we were like anti-states or anything like that, but it just felt like, no. We've not come this far to like go back, right? Obviously, we had no idea where we'd end up because we did end up coming back. And I won't even go to the details of that, but God made it pretty clear because we were like, look, we got to know. We got to know for sure. God, where do you want us to go? We're not trying to hold out for some like spectacular mystical sign, but really, please, like guide us because this is a big deal. We're moving our whole family. And long story short, I would say primarily through relationships. There was relational sort of breadcrumbs, relational connections. We were invited to come back to the States. We're part of a larger family of churches called Every Nation. So that's kind of like our network that we're part of. It's a church planning network. We do world missions, real emphasis on campus ministry. So we're always trying to reach the next generation on university campuses. But through that network and those relationships ended up eventually moving to Corvallis, Oregon. So Grace City, which is the name of our church, also the name of our sending church, in Corvallis, invited us to come on staff there with the idea of possibly planting Grace City in Portland. So that was like the big idea. But it was all through the relationship, through the invitation. And like I said, Portland was more of a, I don't want to say afterthought, but it was never like, oh, it's all about Portland. It was more about, okay, Lord, this is about meeting you in these relationships, trying to submit ourselves to our leaders. At one point along the way, we were asked to be a part of a church planter assessment. So we went through this whole like pretty rigorous like process of discernment and just kind of seeing if this would actually be a good idea, if like this is a good fit for us as leaders and for at this stage in our life. And we were pretty determined the whole process to submit to our leaders and say, look, if this is from the Lord, then we're going to trust. We're going to trust these leaders and we're going to trust the process. And anyways, long story short, we planted a church in Portland. Yeah.
Okay, and then major milestones along that way.
So obviously getting to Portland, we had a team of about 20 people, some people that we had connected with in Corvallis who felt like, we want to be a part of this. And then that 1 year that we were living in Corvallis, I would take the Greyhound up to Portland every Thursday. Spend the day mostly doing evangelism on the campus at PSU, connecting with people, building relationships. We ended up running an alpha course later that year. Through all of that, we had about a team of about 20 people. So that was a big milestone. Assembling a team so that when we finally landed in Portland, we weren't parachuting in. It was like we've taken a year to build relationships and to kind of get acclimated. And when we finally moved to Portland, it felt like, God had surrounded us with some really cool people, at least at the beginning of some really good friendships. So we launched year 3. Oh, here's another big one. So God has been really, has affirmed us, like undeniably affirmed us along the way. One of those ways when we first moved to Portland, we had to find a venue, right? If you've ever planted a church in a city, like that's a thing, right? Like find a venue. And in my mind, if you're planning a church, not that I've ever done this before, but you find like a middle school cafeteria or a community center, or
very common,
or you rent some other church building on like a Wednesday evening, or like you just take what you can get. And we couldn't find anything. At one point, we came this close to renting out the newly renovated community center, like the gymnasium at the Matt Dishman Community Center in Northeast. We're like, oh, this is perfect. Fell through at the last second. We ended up renting Door of Hope's building, the one in Northeast, like that really cool building right across the street from the park with the red door, and they painted it black. You know the one I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
It's like a super dope building. And I remember getting connected with Josh White just after they had moved out of the building because they had like overgrown it and then some, right? And he was saying, "Okay, come rent our building. And I'm like, no way. Like that's too much. It's too much. It just doesn't feel right. Like we're gonna end up being this like spoiled, rotten church plant. Like we gotta earn our stripes. We're gonna rent out this
in a
community."
cafeteria.
So exactly. But we couldn't find a cafeteria, so we ended up renting this church building. And we launched Sunday mornings at this gorgeous church building right there on Fremont. That was a big milestone. Finding our first venue and feeling very, very spoiled and also super affirmed. That felt like some kind of a miracle. 3 years later, Door of Hope very, very graciously told us to move out, either join Door of Hope, change our name, join the family, or go find our own building because they had plans. They were gonna launch their Northeast congregation, which they did do, and I've become great friends with Cameron, and we still have. It feels like we're neighbors. So they kicked us out, and we started looking in for new venue. We ended up buying a building about like 8 or 9 blocks just around the corner down MLK, almost identical to Door of Hope's building. Like this old German Lutheran 100-year-old building with the bell tower. And somehow, as a 3-year-old church plant, we bought this building, which felt like another small to medium-sized miracle.
Yeah.
We didn't have the money, didn't have the track record or the longevity. We're a 3-year-old church plant. I would say in terms of like metrics, the kind of stuff like a lender's looking for if they're going to give a loan to a church plant, we had maybe a couple things going for us. Like we were growing. We had like over 100 people, like just enough to kind of prove to the bank, like, hey, we're good. We're off the ground. Like we're worth the risk. So we ended up buying this building. We met Dan Anderson. You guys know Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows Dan Anderson.
Yeah.
That guy has so much faith. He had faith enough for a whole church, including myself, to somehow convince us that like, no, we can buy this building and it's going to be fantastic. So we did. And then literally a week later, we signed the papers on this building. A week later, this big announcement. There's this thing called COVID happening.
Mm-hmm.
Everything shuts down. I forgot. I remember getting a text from Dan Anderson
talking to you about
apologizing, saying, "I'm so sorry. Good luck." Like kind of like just like saying like, yeah, like this didn't really work out. And
so we closed our church, Central Bible, 2 weeks before the governor's announcement. So then you were buying your church right at the same time.
Yeah, so you guys were probably thinking like, oh, thank God that worked out perfectly.
Oh, exactly.
And we're like, oh, snap, what have we done? Like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Anyways, we bought that building and we spent the better part of a year renovating it. And now it's like a super, super cool space. Somehow we got through the pandemic. And which is probably another big cornerstone, surviving that and just all the upheaval of 2020, 2021. And yeah. So 7-8 years in, we've got a nice, healthy little church. Still feels like every day is a gift. I'd like to say like, oh, we're just like, crushing it, on every level, and there's just no stopping us. Like, but that's for sure not. It's more like, hey, God's not done with us, so we're still there, chipping away, making disciples, just trying to be faithful and not really obsessing over like how big are we and what's the income and these kind of things that can really, really stress a pastor out.
Yeah, and metrics that don't really work in Metro Portland when you're planting, as opposed to like the Bible Belt.
Sure. Yeah.
That's great. It is super, super encouraging when the Lord in His kindness gives us these little affirmations along the way. I mean, sometimes there are just these stretches where there isn't an answer, and there's just the answer is wait. And so you're not really sure, like, am I headed the right way? Am
am I doing anything right?
So it's super sweet when God does that. So kind of zeroing in on your church and getting a little bit more specific, on your church's website, you are described as being a church and part of a movement that is Christ-centered, Spirit-empowered, socially responsible. Can you flesh that out a little bit? Kind of talk us through what each of these things would look like in your context?
Yeah. So maybe the first one's the easiest, maybe the most obvious. Like we preach Christ. We're a Christian church. We preach Christian sermons.
Good.
So at the end of every gathering, if somehow Jesus isn't the hero and the center of attention, then we've missed a step, like a major step. So we preach Jesus, and we do that by keeping our Bibles wide open. Spirit empowered, we are, I guess you could say, we're a charismatic church. We try as practically as we can find ways to make sure we're keeping our understanding of how the Spirit empowers the body, like at the fore of our thinking and our planning. So yeah, we try to make sure that we're creating space where it's like, okay, we're gonna invite the Holy Spirit and we're gonna listen and we're gonna ask Him to guide us. And so, we'll talk about things like receiving prophetic words or praying for healing or depending upon the context, inviting people to exercise spiritual gifts. So we try to do that in a way that's not weird, or it doesn't sort of take away attention from the gospel, but really, I think brings to life the reality of the gospel. So something you'll probably hear me say quite regularly when we gather or when I'm preaching is that the gospel isn't just a concept. What we preach aren't abstractions. It's a reality that we're invited into to experience. And when the Spirit's present with us, when the Spirit of Christ joins us, these things that we talk about, that we think about, actually become realities that we're invited to experience. So I'm always trying to find ways to push back against what I would describe as just a cerebral gospel. Just something we just sit around and we think about, or we like listen to podcasts about. It's like, no, like we should be experiencing the reality of Christ with us. So that's the Spirit empowered piece, and we could probably say a lot more about that. Socially responsible, I think that the gospel needs to be illustrated. We don't just declare it, we demonstrate it. We do good. We serve widows and orphans. We find ways to actually live out and illustrate the gospel in our community. Just basic stuff.
Christianity.
Yeah, 101.
Yeah, there you go. Very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. In Portland, which of those three have you found to be like an inroad missionally in the more secular cultures, or one that people resonate a lot with?
That's a good question. Well, I don't know if I could say one in particular. I don't know. It depends. Depends on the person, the day of the week. Just this morning, I had a lovely conversation with a homeless, drug-addicted woman who came into our building. And so in that moment, it's probably around 9 a.m, I'm thinking, like, how can I serve this woman? What can I do to actually, like, meet a felt need? So I'm thinking, like, social responsibility. How can I do good to this woman in a way that might actually open a door or somehow create a moment to share the gospel? But I wasn't leading with Jesus. I was leading with a cup of coffee. And that's a pretty regular thing where we're at. Like, we frequently are able to just engage people in that way. A lot of homeless people. We have a super cool partnership with the Miracles Club, which is an African-American community center just right around the corner on MLK. And they have meetings in our building, like literally they're there right now. So they have meetings in our space every day this week. It's basically NA meetings. So we're getting to interact with people who have like, who need help, like getting off of drugs and alcohol and a lot of brokenness. So that creates some like obvious opportunities just to dignify people through like hearing their stories and treating them as humans, even though they smell really bad and they struggle to hold conversations. But then I think everyone needs Jesus. Like I don't think that the need for forgiveness is somehow niche or out of date or like something that only applies to certain like people groups. Like everyone is struggling with sin, and only Jesus can solve my sin problem. I don't think any other religion actually offers that. So yeah. Ultimately, I'm trying to bring people into an actual encounter with Jesus through the gospel. I didn't answer your question, but those are my thoughts.
No, those are great examples. Talk a little bit about the global component. So you're part of this Every Nation, like wider global network. How does your local expression of that in Portland, how do you interact with more the global church, and what is that? What value does that add for your ministry, and what's that look like?
How do we interact? Not enough. I'm kind of a head down, nose to the grind. Like I get tunnel vision really, really quick. So being a part of like a global family of churches is really, really good for me. Because I'm constantly being like reminded and challenged, like, dude, get your head up, man. Like, consider the nations. Like, don't forget, God is like, he has a vision for like the world, every nation, every tribe, every tongue. So being a part of Every Nation it helps me, challenges me deeply, actually, just to sort of remember that God is doing things beyond my little tiny bubble. Just got back from a short-term mission trip through our time in London, built some fantastic relationships there. And, we were there for like 19 years. So we've been able to sort of like build on those relationships. The last 2 years, we were invited by the church there in London to bring a team out and be a part of some outreach that they're doing on some of the university campuses where they've been working in the city. So that's been really cool. Just like very practically, like just through that sort of network, that global network that we're a part of, like we get to build relationships and go on mission around the world. And anyone who's ever been on a short-term mission trip knows, like, however you like slice it, we come back more blessed than like anyone. So that's, some real fruit that's come out of those opportunities and those relationships. I don't know. I also just think that like, it's encouraging to know that even though, I don't like take credit for anything God is doing in the UK or any other part of the world, but it's super encouraging to like be a part of these things. And just by the fact that like, we're a part of this global family of churches, like we get to celebrate like what God is doing on a global scale. And I think that builds up the church. It reminds the people that I'm shepherding that we're a part of something big and historic and eternal. And it's not just like something, I don't know, that you read about on the internet or that I pulled from a church history book. Like we're a part of it. Like we're a part of this actual, part of the body that does have a global vision. And it's cool to be able to like celebrate that, even if it's slightly vicarious.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, just a few weeks ago, I was in South Korea at the Lausanne Congress, and it was like over 5,000 believers from all these different nations around the world gathered and worshiping and networking and collaborating, and it is so powerful. There's so much life that comes when you kind of lift your eyes up and you interact with believers from totally different cultural backgrounds, and our contexts are totally different. And I found
I want it for everyone. I think every local church needs, or I think probably wants, opportunities like that. And I'm personally like hardwired to kind of think about life and mission relationally. So yeah, I don't know if I would have much success engaging in any sort of like world missions if it weren't for like these real relationships that I've been able to build with people, whether it's in London or other parts of the world, South Africa or different countries in Europe. So I feel very, very fortunate that this happens to be the thing that I'm a part of. I actually, when I became a Christian, I was 24, and it was my senior year at my university. So it was through campus ministry, which happened to be through Every Nation. So I was kind of like born again into this particular thing, and somehow I managed to stick with it. You know how it is. In the early days, you're like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever! Like, look at us go! We've got global vision." And then eventually, you're like, "Oh, actually, we're pretty dysfunctional. we've got problems just like everyone else." And you think about bailing and finding the perfect movement, but somehow I managed to just stick around, and I'm grateful.
Wow, praise God! So let's just say we were young bucks, just out of Bible college or just out of our youth pastorate ministry, and we're called to go plant a church in Portland, and we're looking at it, and we fly in, and we're doing our vision trip, and we're networking and meeting folks, and we sit down with you and say, hey, and we share our vision, and we talk about, hey, what we're planning on doing. So talk us out of it. If
that's going to be hard. I don't want to talk you out of it.
So
go ahead. All right.
Here's the thing. I mean, I think of Spurgeon in his lectures to his students. He has this lecture where he talks about, he's like, if you can do anything else besides pastoring, you should go do that.
Sure.
Right. The call to the ministry is an undeniable. I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
I have to preach the gospel. Right. So just give us a dose of reality.
Sure.
A bit of the less of the hoorah and a little more of the, okay, just the facts, and this is the cold, hard truth. These are the hard parts of church planting in this city. And just give us a little bit of the dose of reality.
Okay. Yeah. I guess for my personal experience, some of the harder things have been, I said I'm relational. Maybe to a fault. I don't know. And church planting, I remember having more than one sort of veteran pastors tell me this early on. They said, Simon, don't be too discouraged or heartbroken if after X number of years into your church plant, you look around and that team that you planted the church with, like everyone's gone. You're like, no one's left. Like all these people who were like so committed to the vision, and we were like, we're going to do this thing. And there was like this real like bonding because it was all very exciting and intense. Like they're all gone. And I remember thinking like, no, not us. Like I refuse to believe it. And it's mostly true at this point. There's a few people that are like, wow, like you didn't leave. God bless you. Kind of wish you had left, but like, no, I'm just kidding. So, and that's just heartbreaking. That really is just like, oh my goodness, that just like it just breaks my heart. It makes me very, very heart sore. And some people have been sent out. That's always still hard. But I think that is a part of church planning. There is that initial kind of burst of excitement, that pioneering sort of vibe. And then, it doesn't last and people do move on. And that's hard. My encouragement would be to don't try to avoid that. Don't pretend like you don't care. Let it hurt. Grieve as well as you can, and then and keep hurting every time it happens. Like to me, I think that's a fairly good sign that you're guarding your heart, like in the right way, right? Not to like keep people out, but to keep your heart soft, so that every time someone leaves, hopefully it keeps hurting. But that's something to look forward to. I think I would also say that I wouldn't say that Portland's like especially hard. London was hard. Portland's hard. I don't know. I think planting a church is hard, right? Statistically, I think there's a very good chance it's not going to work out. I don't know what the stats are these days, but anecdotally, like I would say, yeah, there's a good chance like your church plant's not going to work
I think
out.
it's something like 3 years is when that's a lot of them fizzle out.
The lifespan, yeah. Sounds about right. And that's also really hard. But go for it anyway. And if after 3 years you look around and you're like, man, this is not the church plant that I had cast vision for. Because, like you go to these churches and you raise money and you're building this team and you're just casting vision. And you have no idea what this thing's going to look like. You don't know what's going to happen. But you can dream, you can pray, and you can cast vision. But probably 3, 4, 8 years in, you're going to look around and be like, wow, this is way smaller than I had anticipated. Or it's bigger, but not nearly as like deep and communal as I had hoped for. And I would say be prepared to love a church that you did not anticipate planting. Just prepare yourself to embrace that reality. And as best as you can, as soon as you can, learn how to love the people that God has entrusted to you, whether that's a little church of 30 people and you're having to like work 2 jobs to like keep this thing afloat. Or maybe, I don't know, just something else. But you talk about like Spurgeon's, and I've heard that before, like if you could do anything else, go do it. If you can't honestly say to yourself, now I'm getting on my soapbox. If I can't look in the mirror and say, Lord, thank you so much for entrusting this part of your body, this little flock to me. Thank you for the great honor of entrusting me with these beloved brothers and sisters. And if you can't say that because you're still holding out for like something bigger and better, I would say go do something else. Go do something else. But if you can learn how to truly love the people that God has entrusted to you, no matter how big it is, or small, or difficult, or wonderful it is, then maybe you're in the right place. Maybe this whole church planning thing is for you.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah,
but that would apply to any place. I don't think that's a Portland thing. I don't know what I would say about Portland specifically. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's a city. It gets dark. It rains a lot. People are grossly insecure, I think. I don't know if that's unique to Portland.
Feels very personal.
Yeah, right? You guys seem very insecure to me. Now, I will say this honestly, and maybe this is a little mean, but I think as a church planter coming in from the outside, like you have a short window to try to figure out, like, okay, before I'm absorbed into the culture here, let me see if I can't like gain a snapshot of like what's happening here, because I'm coming in as an outsider here. So there's some pros and cons to that. One of the pros is like I can come at this with slight objectivity and see if I can't like what is it that makes Portland unique. And I would say I pretty early on realized that the thing that people call weird, it's just gross insecurity. Like there is rampant like identity crisis on mass scale in the city. And it comes out in some like really cool ways. So people will like just over-identify with certain things, hobbies, identities, all that kind of thing. But I find that's something that is uniquely challenging about building a Christ-centered community in Portland. I think maybe more than other places, there is a lot of deep sense of identity crisis in the city. and it manifests in a lot of insecurity. That's very challenging. It challenges me because I don't know if I'm immune.
Sure.
I'm pretty insecure myself most days.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, brother. Those are some great thoughts. So looking at the other side of that coin, how would you encourage us? What have you seen in your time in Portland that have been some unexpected moments or movements of God that have been an encouragement to you, that have brought joy, that are kind of specific to doing ministry here and planting here?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing that stands out to me is the church body at large in Portland has been incredibly like welcoming and supportive, encouraging. Door of Hope, like inviting us into their building, like giving us a super affordable lease, and other just churches, guys like you, Ahshuwah, and Western, and Gary, and just like I could name a bunch of like pastors. So I'm like, oh, like, why did you make time for me? Like, you kind of get the idea coming into a city like Portland. You pretty quickly figure out like, okay, don't tell people I'm from California. Don't lead with church planter because there's just way too many of it. You kind of get a little insecure. Like, am I really welcomed here? Like,
I've come here to save Portland.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm another one, right? And I was just shocked and just really wonderfully surprised at just how welcoming like the church body is in Portland. Just last week, I was at a pastor's appreciation dinner with my wife, and it was totally free, and it was incredible. And I left with $200 cash. Thank you for being a pastor in Portland. I'm like, this is unreal.
That's sweet.
Yeah, super, super cool. So, and I felt that from day one. So if you're going to plant a church in Portland, like I would say, dude, you are welcome. And I hope you feel that the way I did.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
I think that this is one of those cities where it's like, it's super easy to just become kind of jaded because people look around and you just see kind of this, what a lot of people would probably categorize as like a spiritual darkness. And I mean, we talked about this just a couple of weeks ago, Ash, but it's just, I don't think that Portland is like devoid of spirituality or it's like particularly spiritually dark. It's just a lot of people who are seeking and who are confused and who are just finding those answers in a lot of the wrong places. But the Christians that are here, I have actually been incredibly encouraged by. Folks are faithful. They love the Lord. They're not scared of Portland. They're not like running and hiding from, the West Coast kind of liberal, postmodern culture, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it is encouraging to hear that from somebody who's been here for 7.5 years, 8 years now. And you've been brought in and welcomed in and you feel loved. It's great.
Yeah. And hasn't stopped. Yeah. It's super cool.
I think it's a common experience. Like if you come into this city and you're open to collaboration and genuinely wanting to meet people and not like just got your silo and your lane you're going to run in, then you're really welcome with open arms and invited in.
I think part of me felt pretty like desperate for that. So yeah, I don't know. I want that for pastors. Occasionally I'll meet pastors from like across the way and think like, man, like you should come come to one of these meetings. Like I know you don't have time because I don't either, but like, dude, I think you need this. I think we all need this.
Is there a particular network in the city that you're connected to?
Yeah, the what's the Together PDX thing, and I've kind of I'll go wherever I'm invited. Honestly, like so I've kind of
free dinner at $200.
Exactly.
Simon's there.
Yeah, some incentive for you. I didn't see that coming, but I know there's some other networks out there that are just trying to do things like kind of across the different churches. But that's the one that I've kind of just, I don't know, I keep getting invited, so I keep showing up. Yeah.
Was that they did a recent gathering. Who was the main speaker? Was that the Sayers one?
Yeah, the Mark Sayers one. I missed that one. I was just getting ready to go to our little London trip. But yeah, super cool speakers and dinners, and I pray with a group of pastors who are in Northeast Portland on once a month. We're supposed to meet up tomorrow, actually, and it's cool. We just pray for each other.
Yeah.
Super relational. Like, we don't really talk about like, well, what event are you? Do you have? Like, let me promote my thing. Like, I don't think anyone's really even interested in that.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular topic that you've been studying in the scriptures that you're stoked on?
Yeah. So you had asked me that question, and I've been thinking about it. I would say the thing I keep coming back to, at least lately, is the idea of belonging. I'm kind of stuck on that one. We had a conversation about it last week, and I was trying to tell you, what this belonging, how, like in what way. And I remember you had made the comment when we were on the phone. Oh, you mean like the idea of like, belonging before believing? And I'm like, oh yeah, like I've heard that. And I remember thinking like, no, like not that. Like, and in fact, I'd forgotten.
It's a very early 2000s.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was like a thing, right? That like
church thing,
like a trending thing. And I'm like, oh wait, oh no. Like, that's not what I was thinking of at all, actually. I mean, that's a thing. But the thing that I keep coming back to is this idea that like, it's not just about like people who aren't yet believers somehow experiencing some sense of connection with the church community before they convert. Like, I'm not really thinking about that so much. I'm thinking about like humans who really struggle to belong. Like say, for example, like a room full of like 100 Christians who all love the Lord and who, if we're polled, would all say, yeah, this is my church. This is my church home, as we say. And yet maybe only a small fraction of those people could honestly say like, yeah, this is where I belong. These I'm known here. I'm loved here. These are relationships that are going to last. At least I hope. That sense of belonging. And I feel like, and this may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it seems to me that we are experiencing a bit of a societal crisis in terms of our ability to like do good, healthy, lasting relationship and really experience like the belonging that we all like fundamentally desire or really need just to like thrive as humans. So this is what I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I keep coming back to. Currently, I'm preaching through the book of Exodus. So that's where I'm kind of like, in terms of like my study and my preaching, that's kind of where my head's at. But if you were to invite me to your church this Sunday and like, dude, preach your soapbox, best or whatever, like I'd probably end up preaching something on like, this is God's vision for belonging, and this is what it looks like, and this is how we can grow in that.
So practically, when someone visits your church, what do they experience that makes them feel like, wow, I could belong here? Or as they get wrapped into the community, how does belonging happen?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think it's there is practical things. Obviously, there's things that we can do and work on, and strategic ways that we can create opportunity for belonging. But I think when push comes to shove, it's a culture. I think belonging begets belonging. So if you get a people who are growing, who are disciples, who are actually working out the gospel in their lives and in their relationships with Jesus and each other, like, so we're creating a culture. It's a gospel-shaped culture, and a big part of that is this sense of like, well, we belong to another, right? I think it's Romans 7. We have been, those who have died to the law through the body of Christ belong to another. So ultimately, like the sense of I do belong, like that reality, I belong to Jesus. Like that's something that's affecting my identity, the way I view myself, the way I view others. And now that's beginning to like work out on a cultural level. It's like affecting the whole community. But it's a manifestation of the gospel. I belong. I think of the dinner party that Jesus was invited to. Simon the Pharisee hosts Jesus at this party, and they're at the dinner table, and the woman comes in, who's known in the city as a sinner. And she begins to weep and wipe Jesus' feet with her hair. And Simon thinks to himself, if this man was truly a prophet, he would know who this woman is. And of course, the point of the moment is that, in fact, Jesus does know exactly who this woman is, where she's come from, and he loves her nonetheless. She has been forgiven much. And so it's this picture, like this is belonging. This is the woman who, even though everyone is looking at her sideways, thinking to themselves, this woman doesn't belong. And if Jesus actually knew who this woman was, he would agree, you don't belong here. But this is the power of the gospel. Once we've been known and loved, there's nothing no one can say to convince us that we don't belong. I don't care what anyone says or thinks or how they look at me. I do belong. I belong to another. So that, again, I think that then I would preach that. If I was going to preach belonging, I might go to Luke 7 and preach that story. Like this is like the quintessential gospel illustration. And I think that's what I think maybe Mark actually says. She has done a beautiful thing. Wherever the gospel is preached, this story will be told in her memory. It's the quintessential gospel illustrations. That's belonging. Belonging begets belonging. So you think about like John chapter 4, the woman at the well, the woman who is the town pariah, who absolutely doesn't belong, which is why she's got to go out to the well by herself at high noon, right? She meets Jesus. Something happens. She's seen, she's known, and she's loved. That she experiences something. Now she's the insider. So what does she do? She goes back to the village and she begins to tell all the people that told her she doesn't belong that they've got to come and meet the one. They've got to come and meet the one. So this sort of belonging, this fundamental like identity shaping belonging that comes through belonging to another, it compels us to be in welcoming those who are utterly convinced in their own minds they don't belong. And they come into a church prepared for rejection, which is how most of us, that's our MO, right? We go someplace, we're preempting rejection. And hopefully, I hope that Grace City is living this out. Our dream is to live this out, that we'd be the kind of community that begins to make it very, very difficult for people to leave rejected because belonging begets belonging. And I think it also makes a lot of Christians extremely uncomfortable. When I was preaching through this series on belonging earlier this year, I got the distinct feeling that some of the people in our church were getting a little uncomfortable with this notion that like everyone belongs. Like, what do you mean everyone belongs? Like everyone belongs? Like, isn't there some like parameters? Like what are the implications? And you can kind of feel that tension start to build up. And I think I was quite aware because I was quite intentionally building that tension. I'm like, hey, this is at this point. Eventually, towards the end of that teaching series, I said, look, hopefully you are experiencing a bit of tension in this room. Hopefully, you're beginning to wonder, like, how far are we going to go with this? Like, does everyone really belong? Like, what about like, like sin and repentance and these kind of things? Like, how does that factor in? So, anyways, I could talk all day long.
We can tell you're passionate about it.
I am. This is the thing I've been thinking about a lot. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, Simon, looking back to, say, even your time in London when you were actively planning for church planting, thinking about where the Lord would send you, I'm sure that you started receiving advice at that point and input from people who either had just opinions or, actual experience. Can you share a little bit about the advice that you received that was maybe most helpful, and maybe something that, people told you along the way that after 7.5 years of experience you found wasn't very helpful and wasn't very practical?
Okay. Yeah, I actually have to think about that for a sec. Well, I'll start with this. Maybe something else will come to me. So there's a lot of different ways to plant churches, and I'm not an expert. I've done it like 1.5 times, right? The idea of I wouldn't attempt. So I guess I would say, I don't know if this was advice that was given to me per se, but this was advice that I would give someone.
Fair enough.
Do not try to plant a church apart from like some kind of community, some kind of team, some kind of take your time. So I spent a whole year in Corvallis, traveling up to Portland every Thursday. In my mind, I could have been there like another year, 2 years. I didn't have like a definite timeline, and I was in no hurry. Looking back, I think that may have been one of the wisest things I ever did. It wasn't like super deliberate. It's just kind of how it worked out. But I'm really, really grateful. There is this, I think, if you start attending like church planting seminars or reading books, or you pretty quickly begin to feel like you're in this sort of like startup world, right? And it crosses over into like entrepreneurialism, and you feel like, oh, I'm starting up a small business. Like this isn't entirely unlike, opening a dispensary, down the road, or it's a startup is what it is. And there's this sense of like, well, startups require like a lot of energy to get off the ground. You gotta be nimble. You gotta make big moves fast. And I think it's a mistake. I think you should go slow. I think that if the Lord says, like, pick up the pace, we're gonna make some really big moves now. We're like gonna buy a building, even though you don't feel like it's time because like you have no business buying a building at year 3. So that was kind of an unexpected quick move. But generally speaking, I would say, man, we don't need more quick, superficial startup church plants. I think we need some leaders who are willing to go really, really slow, put in deep roots, and God willing, build in a way that means I'm going to like be here for another 50 years. Like, no, look, God could call me to go elsewhere, maybe start something else. So I'm not like poo-pooing a church planner that would like plant and then move on. 'Cause some people have that gift, right? And that's great. But I also think that like church planting attracts entrepreneurs, and sometimes entrepreneurs, to a fault, just move on way too quick. It's like, I'm bored and I want to go on to the next thing. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if we need more of that. So again, I don't know if anyone's going to like necessarily I wasn't given the advice explicitly, but I felt it. I felt that sense of like, look, you gotta make big moves. You gotta go quick. It just all felt very like, and even just that sense of like, if we don't make big moves fast, like we're not gonna survive. Like we're not gonna make it past year 3.
Did you have a 3-year timeline for your funding?
Yes. Yeah. So that
helps create that.
I had a plan. Yes, absolutely. So so you're feeling that pressure every step of the way. And on one sense, like, okay, that's real and can actually be a healthy pressure. It's like, dude, get financially viable. Disciple your people in generosity and like what it means to give and what biblical generosity and tithing looks like. So that's maybe a good pressure. But that can quickly sort of bleed over into what feels kind of like a fleshly urgency. It's like, dude, this is on me to like somehow, be the superstar entrepreneur who's going to just create the best programs and recruit the best leaders and make all the right moves. And I don't know, it feels like the kingdom grows a little bit differently than that. Is that fair? Do you guys agree with that?
No, for sure. I think that there's a lot of conversation in American evangelicalism about like, and I don't think anybody would quite word it like, oh, we need to measure to what extent this is successful. We would say like fruitful. We would spiritualize it a little bit. But at the same time, it's like, can you really measure the fruit if it's not us who generates that, So maybe a better measure is not fruitfulness or success, but faithfulness. And am I being faithful? And I think that I really appreciate what you said just a little bit earlier about I had this idea about a ministry, but these are the people that God sent. So am I actually capable of not only like being grateful for these people, but really loving these people? This is who God saw fit to put around me. This is who he wants me to love. This is who he wants me to shepherd and walk through life with. And sometimes that can mean one difficult season after another. And so am I staying faithful through that? Or am I starting to look to something else because it's difficult to be quote unquote fruitful? It's something this difficult.
And I might even be even more controversial than both you guys.
Nice.
I would say that a 3-year funding timeline can actually create perverse incentives that cause guys to cut corners and be more pragmatic in what they do, and be more like, they won't call it this, but be quicker to find sheep from other churches, just gather the disgruntled churches or Christians that already know how to tithe.
The migration of the saints.
The great migration of the saints. I remember meeting with a church planter, it's a handful of maybe 2012, maybe, so over a decade ago, and he parachuted in, he did all the research, he was all ready. You would probably know his name. But he did like the timeline of churches growing and shrinking in Portland and like where the migration, he had tracked the migration from this church to this church, and then this split, and these went here, and he like mapped it all out.
Wow.
And it's just that question of like, are we just shuffling the deck? And are you really just content taking the guy down the street's sheep and eventually his job so that you can be successful?
Yeah.
And if you're not content with that, then like, dude, start a business, get a job, intern at another church, and like take time, and get a different financial model than like the mama church back in the South that's gonna pay your bills as long as you deliver quote unquote results.
Yeah, that's good. I feel compelled to add, qualify what I was saying personally. And that I have at least a couple of friends who did plant churches. I'm thinking of one guy in particular, right around the same time we planted Grace City, and they got big really fast. And I don't know like how that happened. Obviously, I can guess or make assumptions, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to disparage anyone who's done it differently and or be like, oh well, we're small, and so clearly our motives are more pure. I think that's silly and just judgmental. But I would say what I'm really wanting to say is what's I think most important is motive. And to be aware, like I've had to do my best to be aware that there is that real temptation. It's like, I'm like, I've got to track metrics. Like when we were trying to get a loan for this building that we were buying, like the bank wanted to know, like, what's your regular Sunday attendance? What's your regular income? And like, how long have you been around? Like the basic metrics, right? Like success metrics. That's what the bank wanted to know. And I couldn't like pretend like, oh no, those things don't matter. Like, they'd be like, okay, well, then you're not getting a mortgage. Like, but we want a mortgage. Like I think Jesus wants us to buy this building. So it's there's it's complicated, but to me, what's most important is the motive of love. Whatever you do in love. That's the thing that I want to emphasize. And in my experience, love usually goes a little bit slower than like startup culture, where there's just this constant sense of like, dude, like make it happen, make it big, get the money, recruit the right people, and we're just gonna get this thing. And I'm like, I don't know, like show me. I want to know like where the motives are, and again, I have no business questioning the motives of my fellow church planters, but I must search my own heart and ask the Lord to help me in that way.
Yeah. Amen. Man, this has been so helpful and really encouraging and challenging. If folks want to follow up with you, if they want to get in touch with you or learn about your church, where can we send them?
Simon@gracecityportland.org.
Yeah. Okay. Are you active in any other ways or
social media? Is that what you're talking about?
TikTok?
Not really.
You
No.
have any church dances?
I am slowly or quickly and surely becoming a full-blown Luddite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Awesome.
To tell you. We have a website.
So is that your horse out front?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't the one with the carriage? Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I don't have a smartphone anymore. I've taken some pretty bold steps to just sort of get the internet out of my pocket. And it's been really good for me. So, but we do have a website and social media and all that stuff. But if you want to get a hold of me personally, I don't know. I could give you my phone number, I guess. I won't do that. You could email me.
Awesome.
Actually, if you email the church, it'll end up in my inbox in way of confession.
Well, thank you so much, brother, for being with us. I think it's been really helpful.
Great to chat. Thanks, brother.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.